Hi everybody, it's Andrea Ankrum with Indivisible Northern Kentucky District 4, and welcome to a special edition of our Coffee Klatch Conversations with Candidates. Here tonight we're going to start a series where we're interviewing the primary candidates for the congressional House seat. And so the way that we're going to do this tonight is we have a list of topics that we have created, and we're going to post them now on our sites here so you can see what they are. And we've developed questions that go along with these topics. If you have additional questions and you're watching this live, you can send them to us and we will try to get them to the candidate. If they're not part of these topics that we have, we should have some time at the end for miscellaneous questions. So I'm excited to introduce our guest for tonight, Patti Piatt. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and why you're running for this office?
Well, my name is Patti Piatt. I live in Bellevue, Kentucky, but I grew up right here in Florence. I have to say it's always fun to drive back by Ackerman and the old stomping grounds. I've been a business person and an activist. I wrote my first letter to Congress when I was in 7th grade. I've been wanting to do this pretty much my entire life. Right now, there's so much discord in Washington. There's so much gridlock that I think now is the time for me to step up and take my unique set of skills to Washington so that we can finally have somebody who listens to Kentuckians and who actually represents the people of Kentucky.
Great. So we're going to jump right into our questions because we have a lot of topics to cover tonight. And the first topic that we're going to talk about is the economy.
Okay.
Okay. And so I'm actually going to give a little bit of statistics here,
Sure.
And then we'll ask some questions. So the national unemployment rate is at a 17-year low of 4.1% for the sixth consecutive month in March and has reached 3.9% in April with 164,000 jobs created. The stock market is near an all-time high. However, according to the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, the majority of job growth in Kentucky is in low-wage jobs. 8 of the 10 most common occupations in our state, according to job projections through 2024, pay less than $15 an hour on average, and 3 pay less than $10 an hour. Just 2 of these 10 occupations require an associate's degree or higher. In Kentucky, 76.5% of jobs are in occupations that have median annual pay below 200% of the poverty level for a family of 4. Kentucky ranks 9th worst in the nation on that measure. How would you address the issue of working class people not getting ahead in this current environment of pro-corporations? And what legislation would you introduce or support to ensure companies have to pay a living wage?
Well, when we're talking about unemployment figures being this low, they certainly are low, and the lowest they've been in a long time. However, wages haven't risen, and people still aren't able to pay their bills. And if you want to talk about the poverty level, it is ridiculously low, too. For a family of 1, that's $12,000. So that's not even an accurate measure, in my eyes, of poverty. We have lots of jobs, and I've been saying this all along. It's not jobs that are the problem. We don't have people with the skills to fill those jobs. So we need to look at providing education and training and making education more affordable for people so that they can work their way to the middle class. And we also need to really support our unions. Unions have been the backbone of this country for a very, very long time. They have wonderful apprenticeship programs, but the government continues the war on labor. I absolutely support any federal tax dollars that come here for programs, that a percentage of those be slotted for unions and for labor. And I think that we need to make sure that the prevailing wage is upheld in those contracts.
Can you cite any company or companies in District 4 that have a significant number of jobs standing empty for the reasons that you're describing? Well,
it's tech jobs. So there are the jobs that are growing, and this is nationwide, are service industry jobs.
Right.
And that's been happening for a while. Places like Amazon are hiring warehouse workers. But we don't have, and companies aren't coming to Kentucky that have high-skilled jobs because we don't have the educated, skilled workforce. So it's a double-edged sword. We need people who can, we need welders and plumbers and carpenters and people to work in those skilled trades, and those are some of the trades where people don't have the training to fill.
Right, okay. Recently, the dairy farmers in the state have come under dire circumstances with Walmart developing its own processing plant and subsequent contract with Dean Foods. What would you propose to do if you were elected to help them and other farmers that may experience the same kind of takeover?
It's the attack on our farming communities is real. With the tariffs that have been imposed by the administration, for the last 2 months, China hasn't purchased any soybeans from the United States.
Right.
So, and we produce a lot of soybeans, we produce a lot of corn. It's the tariffs on the bourbon. And in addition to the issues with Walmart, we need to support our farmers.
Right.
And it's not just the dairy industry, it's the entire Kentucky farming industry. The tariffs are, and the changes to the SNAP program, I don't know if you've seen the new Farm Bill. The cuts in the SNAP program are going to further damage our farmers. So this isn't just a one-layered issue. It's a multi-layered issue, and we need to address every portion of it and support our farmers.
So how do you suggest we do that?
Well, for a long time there have been subsidies, but we need to first of all we need to get these tariffs. Take these tariffs away, because and supporting the SNAP program. Those are the two things that are going to hurt our farmers most. And there's a lot with the SNAP program. Milk is included in that as well. So why we keep cutting benefits to the poorest of the people is beyond me.
Right.
But supporting the SNAP program
Okay.
and getting rid of the tariffs go a long way to propping up Kentucky's farmers.
Okay. So let's talk about tax reform. One of your top priorities is rebuilding the middle class.
Yes.
You have said. Do you think
And the
this is
working class,
done?
yes.
Do you think this is done through tax reform?
I think it's not done through the tax reform we have, and I don't want to call it tax reform. This wasn't
Right.
a tax reform. This was a snatch and grab tax cut, and people are now coming out and saying this was a really bad idea. And there were a lot of us who were saying all along that didn't work.
Right.
We can't continue to tax to build our economy on the backs of the working class. The 1% has gotten this huge tax break, and it's not sustainable. And it certainly isn't going to help the working class and the middle class, and that's a direct assault on the working and middle class. So we've got to have a tax code that is more fair and more balanced, and we can't continue to do trickle-down economics. It's never worked.
Right.
Yeah.
I think half of us know that, and the other half don't
I think
seem
more
to
than
know.
half. Actually, more than half of us know that.
Right.
We just don't have the 1%'s pull.
Right. So how do you suggest rebuilding the middle class? What are some ideas that you have for that?
Well, we've got to not just look at the middle class, but we've got to look at the poor and the working poor and the middle class. And I think strengthening our unions is a great pathway to rebuilding the middle class and supporting the poor and the working poor. I think that we need to make policies that allow people to have education and training that's affordable and accessible. For example, you can learn to write computer code online for free.
Right.
But if you're in parts of this district don't have reliable internet. So if you're in Greenup County or Boyd County or out in any of the other rural counties, you can't access those programs. So we need to make training affordable and accessible.
So what changes would you propose to the newly adopted tax system? You stated Congress has a duty to put the citizens and job creators first. Who are you referring to as these job creators?
The economy for a long time, the government has the ability to drive the economy and has a vital role to play in that. And what we're doing now, and certainly with Tom Massey's policies of no federal money to the states, you know, the federal government can build roads. The federal government has always been the one who's propped up the middle class and been the job creator. And people say it's small business, when in fact, those things happen through federal government pumping money into infrastructure. You know, and I would like, in my view, infrastructure also includes internet.
Right, right. Okay. Do you think that this current tax reform bill will help small businesses grow? If not, what are your ideas to help this sector of our economy?
Small businesses are still taxed at a larger percentage.
So they didn't get a tax cut like
not. They were. It's like giving a tax. It's like the same tax cut we got.
Right.
Okay. But the bigger issue really for small businesses is health care. And trying to afford health care in small businesses. I have a friend who runs an asphalt and paving company, and she has a small workforce, and this is one of her biggest expenses. So really, Medicare for all would go much further to helping small businesses and businesses in general. Because I was a businesswoman, and I ran multi-billion-dollar budgets every year, and one of the biggest things in our budgets every year was health care. So we can prop up businesses and small businesses by taking that burden away from them.
Okay, let's move on to healthcare then.
Okay.
You have stated that the ACA was a good step in the right direction toward providing health insurance for every American. Over 500,000 Kentuckians now have health insurance, either through the exchange or Medicaid. You also stated that there are many problems that need to be fixed, right? What are some of these problems as you see them, and what would be your short and long-term goals in working towards a fix? Because we saved the ACA, right?
Well, we really didn't, because the administration is taking away the subsidies and trying and doing through executive orders small things that are undermining the ACA. If we go again towards Medicare for all, this will go a long way. I mean, we already have a single payer system in place.
Right.
It's called Medicare.
Right.
So I think we need to work towards expanding that. Again, this will help business growth. We'll have a healthier populace. We'll have, and it will grow the economy if we're taking those burdens away. The ACA, I know that our health insurance went down with the ACA, and in fact, right now it was cheaper for us to COBRA our insurance, which is unheard of,
Right.
than it was to go on the exchange.
Wow.
But my husband, before we were married, got his insurance on the exchange. He's self-employed, and it was very affordable. Now that's not the case. It was cheaper for us as a family to COBRA.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's another problem. People who are 55 and older, people who are self-employed, like my husband, and people who don't get company-sponsored insurance,
Right.
should at least, that's a really good start to fixing the problem.
Okay. How would you address constituents who say government shouldn't be involved in healthcare? We have,
We already are.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, we're leaving. Our health care is predicated on full-time employment. Again, as a businesswoman, those benefits were a huge part of our expenses, and bringing on people full-time didn't help my bottom line. So there's no incentive for us to do that.
Right.
And so we've put we're putting the burden on corporations. We're giving them tax cuts, but no incentive to hire people full-time and to provide health care. To me, that's really, really backward. And then so the insurance companies are making all the profits. The burden is on the employers or the government to provide health care. And I think we need to really take a good long look at why we're giving companies tax breaks, to give them tax breaks, and instead of incentivizing them to hire people full-time. That's why people are working 2 and 3 jobs.
Right.
Because at 30 hours, over 30 hours, you're required to provide benefits.
Right, right. So you have suggested the possibility of allowing 50-plus-year-olds to buy into Medicare, 55. But what about the largest part of the population that opts out of health insurance, which are the millennials and Gen Z? Why only focus on the older population for Medicare?
Well, that's a good place to start. Working towards Medicare for all, absolutely the Gen Z and the millennials will benefit from that greatly. And then that also increases the healthy people in the pool.
Right.
We haven't done anything to incentivize those people, and in fact, we've punished them for not going in. And the more people in the insurance pool, the better we all do,
Right.
because we need the healthy people.
Correct.
But right now, the immediate need, if we're going to put Band-Aids on, then we start with people 55 and older.
Many health insurance companies are for-profit businesses with stockholders to appease. This takes money away from actual healthcare services and keeps premiums high. Would you consider submitting legislation to repeal the Health Maintenance Organization Act of 1973? And what other ideas do you have to make healthcare more affordable and functional for all?
Well, again, yes. And I also think we need to publish healthcare costs so that consumers can make those choices for themselves. And again, this is while working towards Medicare for all. We can't flip that switch immediately, so we need to take steps to do that.
Right.
The federal government has some pretty serious buying power. We should be able to drive down the costs of pharmaceuticals, which we're not doing.
Right.
We should be able to open the market to say this is how much the service costs at these 10 places, so that people can make those choices and consumers can choose what's best for their families.
Okay, we're going to move on to the environment. Congress passes laws that help to protect the environment, such as the 1972 Clean Water Act. I mean, that's how it works. This gave the EPA the authority to implement pollution control programs, such as setting wastewater standards for industry. The current administration wants to roll back environmental protections because they claim these regulations stifle industrial growth. How will you ensure that the EPA is fully enforcing the environmental laws passed by Congress and not working for the coal and chemical industries?
Well, first of all, we've already, and let's start with the rollback on putting potash into our streams. That's already happened, and that has nothing, in my opinion, to do with making it easier for businesses to do business. It had everything. It was it was done retroactively, so that Massey Coal, who owned billions in fines, I think millions, I'm sorry, I don't know about billions, owed millions in fines, did not have to pay those fines. So that was Mitch McConnell giving a little break to some buds. We have the Red River has wild and scenic river status because of the EPA and those bills. In Kentucky, certainly we don't have everywhere in Martin County, for an example, clean water, but if we roll these regulations back, it will directly affect Kentucky and our rivers and our streams. I know that for years in Greenup County and Boyd County, we had Grace Chemical, we had Ashland Oil, and the groundwater, we had issues there. So we can't rely on companies to take care of that themselves.
Right.
So we've got to stop the rollback to protect our children and our water and our land.
How will you do that, though? How can Congress make sure that the EPA is protecting us and not rolling back the regulations?
Yes.
Just how can Congress help?
We need more Democrats. we need more Democrats, because we're so imbalanced now that there aren't enough people to balance out those legislations and to hold people accountable. If you've got one party running the entire show, we don't have the voice that we should. And I don't hear Tom Massey trying to protect the environment. I did hear a really long explanation about photosynthesis the other day, which was really, really informative. But it certainly doesn't help protect Kentucky groundwater.
Right, right.
And it would go a long way to get rid of Scott Pruitt.
Right. Are there any specific regulations that you think could be loosened that may be too restrictive and are hurting small businesses?
I know that compliance with some of these regulations is expensive, and so perhaps we should look at that instead of changing the regulations. I'd have to explore. There's a lot of regulation.
I know.
So I'd really have to explore. I go back to my friend who has the small business, and I know that these things are hard for them
Right.
to do. We need to make it easier to comply instead of changing the rules.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so we're going to talk about energy. You have stated that we are on the cusp of a major shift in energy and transportation technology. Government's role is to support, not restrict, new, cleaner energy forms and to provide educational grants and incentives for companies who are taking bold steps for the future. This is our chance to lead the world in development instead of falling behind other nations. So other nations around the world have had solar, wind, and other renewable energies as their primary source for almost a generation now. Why do you see the U.S. as being on the cusp of a major shift now, and how could we be seen as leading eventually?
China is really taking the lead on this. I spent some time with some wonderful people who design. If you have a business, you want to go solar, they come and design that for you, and they arrange for that to happen, and they arrange for it to be installed. And this was such an incredibly informative day for me. And I asked, how is this going to help Kentucky?
Right.
And the answer was remarkably eye-opening. We can't build solar panels here. We don't have everything it takes, but we can build the cells. We can build different parts of the panel. To install a solar panel, it takes a master electrician and 5 other skilled people.
Wow.
So when the tariffs were imposed, we didn't lose very many jobs for people who create solar panels. We lost hundreds of thousands of jobs for people who install solar panels. So as we're making the transition from coal, which I think we all agree needs to happen and is inevitable, solar energy could really help bring jobs and boost the economy of Kentucky.
Absolutely. So you have stated lobbying by traditional energy forms has not only cost us jobs, but is halting the growth of our future. Additionally, the current administration in Washington is not on board with renewable energy. This isn't quoting you now. This is.
Oh, I was going to say that.
You didn't say that part. Current administration in Washington is not on board with renewable energy and fully embraces the expansion of the fossil fuel industry. You said Kentucky's lost coal jobs could be replaced with the solar energy jobs if government will remove the chokehold it has on this new industry. What specific ideas do you have to reverse the direction the current administration is heading with regards to energy?
Well, let's start at home. There was legislation that didn't pass in Kentucky that's going to really help the solar industry here. And we've got to we keep pandering and lying to our coal miners. Coal, and even people in eastern Kentucky know that coal is not coming back. And yet we've got lawmakers who kowtow to the fossil fuel industry. In the meantime, depriving people in Kentucky of a way to actually make a living. I think it's unconscionable. I think we need to be honest, start working toward renewable energy, and understand that by doing that, it creates jobs exponentially in installation and manufacture, and it's the right thing to do. And it's time to stop lying to our miners.
Okay, we talked about that question. The U.S. has the longest railway system in the world, but it's arguably in the worst condition. How do you propose generating the funds necessary to bring us up to date with the likes of China?
Again, infrastructure. Massey can say all day long that the government shouldn't be helping the states with infrastructure, and that is, in my opinion, patently wrong. The stronger our railways, the stronger our roads, the stronger our waterways, the better we are as a country, and the better able we are to deal with our economy and to grow our economy.
So our nation's infrastructure is crumbling. You know,
Yes.
bridges, we have one here, the Brent Spence Bridge in Covington, that's going to take billions of dollars to replace or repair. The roads, the water systems, Flint, Michigan, we've got Martin County right here in Kentucky. We need to invest heavily in repairing and maintaining our infrastructure and investing in new utilities such as internet access everywhere, what we talked about. The current administration wants to sell our infrastructure to private corporations who will then charge us to use them.
Yes.
What are your specific ideas for repairing our nation's infrastructure, and how will we pay for it? This is the biggest question, is we all know
it needs
we
to be
need this. How are we going to pay for it?
Well, you know, going back to my businesswoman role here, you have your top line and you have your bottom line. The way that you create a stable bottom line is to manage the expenses in the middle. And we continue to go back to the same places, the same time, without growing revenue, giving tax cuts to the 1%, when we need infrastructure, we need to bolster education, we need the money. So we've got to take a good, long, hard look at where our money's going and stop going back to the welfare entitlements, because there are a lot of places we could save money that aren't those, and raise revenue without hurting the middle class, without hurting the working poor, and with very little pain to anyone.
So what just happened in Washington is, you know, they did this big tax cut, and then they passed a budget which, you know, is out of control, basically. So how would you kind of remedy that situation? Or is that a problem? Some people think it's not a problem.
Oh, it's huge. And this is I got to say, one of the places I agree with Massey. You know, passing the omnibus spending bill, we keep putting a Band-Aid on a problem instead of discussing it. But this goes back to the gridlock. We've gotten so that we're making legislation behind closed doors, and we're pushing it out quickly, and then requiring a vote. And I'm sorry, that's lazy, and it's irresponsible. We need to look and understand and read. Bill. Let's just start with reading. Start with reading. Read the bills. The tax cuts, again, are being proven, and even by Republicans that sponsored those, to be a disaster. And then we pass a spending bill, and the tax cuts are causing us to go deeper into debt faster. And then we pass a spending bill, nobody's really sure what's in it. And we'll do the same thing again in September. And I think that we really need to take this. These are serious issues that affect every American. They can't be discussed behind closed doors.
Absolutely.
And we need to have all the voices at the table. You know, when I have a problem in the business world, I bring everybody to the table. It doesn't matter if they agree, and in fact, it's better if they don't agree with me, because the more opinions that we have, the more voices, the more knowledge we have at the table, the better legislation we can put forth.
Right. So we talked a little bit about trade. The president believes that the U.S. economy is suffering due to the many bad trade deals we are in, China, NAFTA. He has stated that trade wars are good for us and easy to win. Currently, he has proposed to increase tariffs on imported steel, and in return, China has retaliated by decreasing orders of American soybeans, like we had discussed. We should continue to expect this type of volatility as long as this current administration does not have a clear plan on trade. It seems like there isn't a clear plan. What can you do as a representative in Congress to help farmers, industry workers, and consumers through this time of market instability due to the president's comments on trades?
These tariffs are irresponsible. They aren't going to help our farmers. We haven't seen an impact on steel or aluminum, so I'm going to withhold judgment on that. But we have seen a direct impact from the soybeans no 2 months of not purchasing soybeans.
Right.
We have to support our farmers. We have to oppose these tariffs, and we have to put this legislation. We have to put, instead of governing by executive order, we have to put this back in the hands of the legislators and back in the hands of the people.
Because I'm not clear on this, but if the president is in charge of imposing tariffs and he does that,
and yes, he can.
How can Congress kind of counteract some of those?
Part of the lovely checks and balances. Legislation, he can veto that legislation, but and again, these tariffs haven't technically gone into effect yet.
Right.
These are proposed.
He's talking about
right.
them.
He's talking about it, and look what's happening.
I know this is what it does.
Exactly. So we as Americans need to stand up, and we've done it before. We did it with the ACA. We've changed the path of. The Republicans have control of both the House and the presidency. Right. For now. But they've got nothing done,
Right.
and the reason is people like you. And people like I, and all of us have stood up and taken action, and it's the same thing with these issues. Until we can get more balance in the federal government, more Democrats, we have to keep pushing and get on the phones and oppose things like these tariffs.
Right. Okay. I'll talk a little bit about foreign policy. Since Trump took office in January of 2017, the U.S. military presence and activity in Yemen and Somalia have greatly increased, largely under the radar of average citizens. I mean, they don't talk about this on the news, right?
Yeah.
U.S. troops died last year in both conflicts, yet he didn't mention either of this in his State of the Union address. There was a 140% increase in spending on our activities in Yemen, and we have more than double the number of troops and U.S. airstrikes in Somalia, while adding 2 new military headquarters there. Why are we involved in these conflicts? What should our national role in these matters be?
Congress should have a larger role. What happened with this administration is that Trump said, you know what, generals, do this, and has basically left this in the hands of the generals and the people in the military. And I think that that's short-sighted. Not that I don't trust and respect the people in the military, but in Somalia, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, we don't have a clear objective and we don't have a clear end game.
Right.
So we continue to send troops in, and none of us know exactly why. None of us know what the end game is. None of us know what winning or losing looks like. So we need to have discussions about these things, and we need to quit doing it, again, just like everything else that we're doing behind closed doors. The American people have a right to know where our children are being sent to fight and die.
Right. So how does Congress step in to stop some of this? We hear this all the time about even our own representatives here in Kentucky. They talk about, why are we here? Why do we keep sending people to Afghanistan? It doesn't seem like they're doing anything about it. What can they do, or what will you be able to do when you get there? What kind of legislation can be implemented to stop some of this?
There's already legislation in place that says that the government can't. In Syria, that bombing should have gone through Congress.
And it didn't. And so what?
Right.
What's the?
There's nobody there to hold it. If again, it's accountability, and there aren't enough people there to disagree. So we've got to have more Democrats.
So you're thinking that it's kind of letting it slide. The current party that's in control is letting it slide because
they're too busy worrying about other ridiculous things, and there's not enough people there to make enough noise. And we've got to have. I think we work better when there are more balance, and quite frankly, that's borne out.
Okay. So we're going to talk about immigration now. This is another hot topic. The president continuously says that Democrats are weak on borders and want illegal immigrants to pour into the country, in effect having open borders. He just said this like 2 days ago.
Well, he said it, yeah. I think he said it today again.
Probably.
He said it again.
He also wants $25 billion plus for a border wall, which he thinks will stop illegal immigration. What is your take on the current administration's war on immigration and the constant attack on Democrats about this? Are illegal immigrants pouring into the U.S., and is a border wall the answer?
Illegal immigration is at an all-time low, or at least at least in the last 20 some years. People are not pouring over our borders.
Right.
There are several things that are bigger issues. The people who are illegally here came here legally and just stay.
Right.
And that's the majority of the illegal immigrants here. People aren't pouring over our borders. That's a fallacy. A border wall isn't the answer. It's an expensive. We're going to eminent domain people's lands. We're going to build a wall through wetlands that are protected. I mean, when in reality we have technology that can do that much more efficiently without disrupting anybody's backyard. And I mean, I can pull up on my phone right now the traffic in Nogales, Mexico. We have that technology.
Right.
So we could hire more Border Patrol agents to watch that technology. I mean, think about the guys who sit in the in parking garages and monitor those. I mean, we know how to do this. The wall is a symbol of something, and it's completely unnecessary.
I'm assuming you would fight that.
I'm
allocating funds towards
absolutely.
But what happened was there was this almost like a trade-off with DACA and the wall. It's either the DACA or the wall. How, and somehow that has gone, on the back burner. But how will you support DACA recipients in their efforts to stay in this country? And if it came down to this hostage situation with either the wall or DACA,
I'm not going to be held hostage. They're two, in my estimation, two completely different things. We're talking about the lives of children who grew up here, who are productive members of our society, who are tax-paying members of our society.
Right.
Who, in order to stay here, can't break the law or they have to go home. The criteria for them staying in this country is very strict. So this whole view of immigrants as criminals and it's
a fear tactic, I think.
It is fear-mongering, and it is frustrating to me, clearly, because I'm having a moment. But I think we need to make it easy for DACA recipients to stay. We need people. We have more jobs than we have people for, and so let's give them a path, a clear and easy path, because it's a very arduous process. So let's give them a clear and easy path to citizenship.
Why do you think that's stalled in Congress, DACA? We were supposed to, it was back in, I can't even remember now, last year, and there was a deadline. And
the thing about it is, and the courts, by the way, just recently upheld that DACA is legal. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
It still has to be addressed.
Right. The majority of Americans support DACA. The majority. But for a long time, that isn't how the people above us govern. They're getting pressure from outside and not listening to the people that they represent.
Right.
It's not, I think that they're stalling on it because they don't want to build the border wall. I mean, that's my opinion.
Yeah.
But because it's popular with a few people, but DACA, everybody supports, or at least a majority support.
Right. So what specifically do you think we need to do, if anything, to address the illegal immigration? Is the current system working, and if not, what needs to be fixed?
Again, the people that are staying, it's people coming in on visas and staying. That's the issue.
So how do we fix that?
Well, we make it easier for them to stay legally. Again, I worked in higher ed for a long time, so I saw these students coming in H-1 visas, and they didn't want to go home, and they stayed. And they stay under the radar because it's the process is so incredibly cumbersome, and it's expensive. So you're asking people who, now the college students, many of them might be able to afford that, but it's still a very long process. It's easier just to fly under the radar. But for immigrants who don't have resources, this is an expensive process. So we need to really look at a way to make this more affordable and to make the path to citizenship easier and quicker. It takes I've known people, I've known people that 12, 18 years.
Right. Okay, so we're going to switch gears to education. Public education seems to be under attack these days. Public schools are underfunded, and the Secretary of Education is pro-charter and private schools. We continue to say we want our children to have the best education in the world and expect them to have the highest test scores, but we don't provide enough funding for this to be possible. When this happens, we can't recruit and retain good teachers. And Thomas Massie has introduced a bill that would eliminate the Department of Education because he feels that each state should be in control of how they educate their students. What specifically would you do to support public education in the United States at the federal level?
I have so many things that I want to do.
It's a mess.
Well, charter schools have failed. This is a way to enrich people, to privatize the industry, and I am firmly against that. We need to fund our schools. We need to upgrade technology. We need more than one textbook in a room. I was talking to a woman who was helping her niece with her algebra. And she had a little piece of paper. She said, well, go get your book and let's look at this. And she said, the book is in my classroom. We only have one. How do we as a nation expect to compete in a global economy, which we have whether we like it or not? And certainly here in Kentucky, we aren't going to be able to attract businesses and retain educated people until we prop up education. And I'm also very concerned about the fact that teachers can't collect Social Security. And that was a Carter era federal law. And I think that we need to look at overturning that, because if your spouse pays into Social Security all those years, you should be able to access those funds. But it's funding. And we also need to help students with debt.
That's my next question.
Well, we bailed out the banks. We bailed out Wall Street. Why aren't we bailing out our students? One of our most valuable resources. There are people with advanced degrees who have hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. It's making, the American dream has changed for the millennials. It's not, can I buy a house? It's, can I pay my student loans?
Right. So how can the federal government specifically support students trying to get higher education without being saddled with these massive debts? What specific programs would you support to help alleviate this financial burden on our young workers? I mean, there's, student loans can be 8% interest.
They're huge,
more than a loan for a corporation, Why? What are some ways that we can help them with this debt?
The programs like the Pell Grant have been dramatically cut. I know that, I
got the Pell Grant.
I mean, when I was going to college, a Pell Grant actually meant something. But now it doesn't cover books. So we've defunded our schools. We've defunded the programs that help students afford those schools. And then we've saddled them with this tremendous debt, and then they come out and they can't find a job that pays a living wage. So this is a problem we need to address at several levels. We need to, again, make sure our schools are funded so that students can afford to go. We need to look at how to help relieve the student debt. And I'm not talking about just while they're attending, but once they leave school. I mean, this is an untenable situation for a lot of people.
Right, right. I mean, they may not be able to buy a house.
No.
If you have that much
Exactly.
student debt each month, you can't afford a house payment.
I know a family, and these are professional people. These are lawyers. And they've got so much student debt that they're not able to save money. And this gets into a whole nother situation with, I know a lot of people don't have any money in retirement.
Right.
A lot. Most of the people I know.
Right.
So we're creating a problem that down the road is going to have a tremendous financial impact, and we've got to address it now.
Right. Okay, we're going to talk about the Second Amendment.
Okay.
You're a gun owner, as are many, many Kentuckians. The argument that I've heard against stricter gun ownership laws is why punish law-abiding, responsible gun owners with more restrictions? What do you say to that argument?
That's ridiculous. There's not, I know a lot of gun owners, and one of the things we all say is we're not punishing people who are responsible. This is not a punishment. And a stronger background check, a 72-hour waiting period, restricting the purchase of military-style assault weapons. These aren't punishments, and nobody's coming for you for your guns. For the love of, just stop. My father passed away, and he was very, very right wing. Very, very. I don't know where I came from. Both my parents are. But I have his mail forwarded to my house. And you would not believe the fear-mongering in the NRA. We got something from a local politician who said that, if this passes, they're going to take your handguns. And that's wrong.
I know.
It's an out-and-out lie.
Right.
We're not going to overturn the Second Amendment, and these people need to stop saying that.
How do we get them to stop? I mean, that's just a whole tactic that
because people are afraid to speak up, and I'm not.
Good.
I'm not afraid of the NRA. I'm not going to take any money from the NRA. I actually got the Moms Demand Moms Demand Action Candidate of Distinction designation. I'm not afraid to have that conversation. We can't be afraid to have that conversation. And again, we need the diversity in Congress and people like me who are willing to say, no, we need this common sense legislation. And we're not trying to take your guns, and stop saying that. You know what it takes to overturn a constitutional amendment. So every time they say that, I just want to, it's not happening and nobody's suggesting it. So stop saying that to raise money.
There's only one party that's suggesting it, and it's the other party.
Right, it's not us. No.
Do you feel like gun ownership laws are a state-level issue, or do we need more done at the federal level? Because a lot of states have their own gun ownership rules, and so like Chicago, they're having this big, gun violence problem, and what they say is that the guns are coming in from Indiana, where they have less strict laws. So do we need more done at the federal level? Yes and no. I think we need to have standards, absolutely. We need to we need to hold people accountable who buy guns, and for the straw man purchases, and that we need to that could be federally regulated. Waiting periods could be federally regulated. Background checks. Fix the Nix's system. It's a great system, but people aren't reporting into it. Which is, for those who aren't aware, the database that they check when you purchase a gun. So those absolutely. And I think that the federal government absolutely has the right to say, and they've done it before, a ban on assault-style weapons. Right. And the Supreme Court has upheld that. Okay, so we talked about, what specific measures would you introduce or support in particular to address domestic violence gun owners and the ability of mentally ill people to legally obtain guns?
It's a little slippery slope for a woman who was on the board of the ACLU. I think we need, if you've been convicted of domestic violence, and a woman in a home with a domestic abuser who has a gun is 50% more likely to be killed by that gun.
Right.
So if you've been convicted of domestic violence, of assault, and you have a gun, we need to get that gun. If you have a temporary restraining order, I think that we need to take that gun.
Right.
And particularly in those situations. And I'm not saying that there's no due process there. But if you've gone through the process and the judge has decided that you need an emergency order of protection, then they need to go get the guns. What was the second part of the
The
question?
mentally ill people who illegally obtain guns. So we've seen that kind of in recently, where we've had some people who are clearly have mental issues, and they have been able to purchase guns.
I want to make sure that if we make that legislation, we're very clear about the definitions, because a lot of people take antidepressants or anti-anxiety, or so we need to be very careful how we classify people, and we need to put in place a process that doesn't infringe on their civil rights. If, for example, you're discharged from the service because you have PTSD, do we take the gun from that person? So to me, this is a really complicated area that needs a lot of input and a lot of discussion, because there really could be. We don't want to infringe upon anybody's rights, but we also want to make sure that people who are genuinely in need of mental health, don't have access to guns. So
it is going to be difficult, but
it needs to be done.
It does.
But again, it's a discussion, and we have to start the discussion.
Right, have to start somewhere. So we do have a little bit of time if we have online questions that we could answer, but I have some miscellaneous questions already written up here. So here's a question: what election or voting reforms are needed at a federal and state level to protect and strengthen our democracy and to encourage more Kentuckians to vote?
Let's start with Russian interference in our elections. One of the things that has been very frustrating to me is we have 17 intelligence agencies that are saying the Russians tried to interfere in our elections. And I've seen 0 time spent on that. And money was put aside for them to use to protect our elections. They didn't touch it.
Right.
I do want to thank Secretary Grimes, who has on her own been working very hard to ensure that and protect our elections here in Kentucky. And we are lucky here. We can register to vote on our telephones.
Right.
I'd like to see automatic voter registration when people turn 18.
Right.
We need to look at what's been done to the Voting Rights Act, and we need to restore it fully. And I think that people, nonviolent felony convictions, need to have their voting rights restored.
Right. Okay. Will you guarantee that if you're elected to office, you will hold open town halls at least twice a year, or at least several times for the year? Will you promise to meet with all your constituents, not just donors and like-minded ones? So we kind of have that situation.
Oh, we absolutely do.
How do we ensure that our representatives will meet with us?
Yeah, Mr. Massey was in town and met with the Rotary Club. It wasn't open to the public. I don't understand how you're a public servant and you don't talk to the public. I have been doing that. I've been on the road a lot. And I've been to 19 of the 20 counties, and I've been to many of them multiple times. And I'll hit my 20th county next week. Talking to the voters is the single most important thing you do. And once you're elected, you represent everyone. It doesn't matter what party. And at this point, it's beyond Republican and Democrat. This is about Kentucky. This is about what's good for Kentucky. So I did a bipartisan event the other day, and this man looked at me and said, well, what if I don't agree with you? And I said, then I need to hear your opinion. And he was kind of taken aback. I said, all the voices at the table. And Tom Massey likes to talk to the people who agree with him. And we don't, I don't think Andy Barr's had a town hall in a very long time. I don't think the people of Kentucky have had adequate representation in Congress for a very long time, and that's unacceptable.
Right. What will you do at the federal level to improve and increase overall transparency? There's been a lot of backroom, like we talked about, backroom deals, even here in our own state, where things are pushed through. There's not enough time to read bills. How do we correct that problem?
We get back to regular order.
Yeah.
John McCain has discussed this, and I have to agree with Tom Massey on this one. You can't legislate in the dark, and that's what they seem to want to do. I mean, you remember that when they were trying to repeal the ACA and write the health care bill,
right,
and Rand Paul pushed, whatever it is he pushed, over to, because he couldn't even get in.
Right.
So
right.
This is not a way to govern, and this isn't a way to represent the people. If you don't hold public hearings, then you're clearly hiding something, and your agenda isn't up for scrutiny. There's a problem.
Right. Okay, there's our last question.
Okay.
Might be the best one. Do you believe that medical marijuana should be made legal at the federal level? Because right now, Jeff Sessions, he's very much against marijuana, but a lot of states are trying to put through legislation that would make medical marijuana legal. But if the federal level decides it's illegal, that could shut everything down.
I'm sorry to say that I can't remember who just proposed the legislation on a federal level, but that is actually in play. And yes, I support medical marijuana, and yes, I think it's an important issue. I have to say that there are two bills right now that Mitch McConnell's put forward. One of them is the hemp legislation. So while we're waiting, and this will be cumbersome, this removing the federal burden from medical marijuana. So in the meantime, let's grow hemp, because the transition would be incredibly easy. We import $200 billion of hemp and hemp products into this country every year. Do you know what even a portion of that would do for the state of Kentucky? Right. And how quickly we could go from hemp to marijuana? So I actually am agreeing and supporting Mitch McConnell on that.
Wow. Okay. So that's all our questions that we have submitted here. And so if you want to just take a couple minutes here and talk to our audience and tell them why they should vote for you in the upcoming primary.
I know. I have the campaign structure to take me through the general. So I'm prepared to go forward. Also, I'm passionate about the people of Kentucky, and I've been passionate about politics for a very long time. I bring a unique skill set to the table with being a businesswoman and an activist, and having written my first letter to Congress in 7th grade, which, by the way, was about the Electoral College.
Wow.
This serving the state of Kentucky is something I've wanted to do for a very, very long time. And I feel that, again, my particular unique set of skills will serve the people of Kentucky very, very well.
Great. Thanks so much for being here, Patti, with us. And everybody out there, thanks for joining us tonight. If you want to watch this broadcast again, it will be posted on our Facebook and our YouTube channels. And join us again next week for our next candidate. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.